Hello and welcome to Minivangelism, the driver's seat, where we talk about the Bible without the kids in the car. If the kids are in the car, let them go do something else so we can hang out together. Today, we are talking about signet rings,
tantrum tools,
and Braveheart.
Oh, bless.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's go.
Hello and welcome to Minivangelism, the driver's seat, where I just remembered that I start the intro and where we talk about the Bible without the kids in the car. If the kids are in the car, go listen to something else. Instead, you get to hang out with us and talk about Joseph.
Yes, part two.
Part two. And parts of the story that we did not share with your children.
No, we did not.
So let's start right there. In our Minivangelism episode, we said Joseph is in jail for something he did not do, which is the truth.
Yeah.
But what is the crime he was charged with, Anna?
He was charged with sexual assault.
Yes.
Against his boss's wife.
Yes. Not good.
Not good at all.
So his boss's name is Potiphar.
Yes.
And I'm sure there's an interesting meaning to that name. I don't know what it is, but he's working for Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him.
Yes.
And he's like, no.
Yeah.
And runs out of the room. And then she runs out and says, he tried to do things to me.
Well, she took his coat. Like, she had him by the coat, and then he, ducked out.
See, I knew you would know all the details to this part of the story.
And he left the cloak in her hand. And
Yeah.
so then when she goes to the other servants and because they hear a commotion going on, and she's standing there with Joseph's cloak. And I'm assuming Joseph just ran naked out of her room then.
Yeah.
And she's like, he tried to attack me and I got the cloak. And then he goes to jail.
Why is it in the Bible?
Because patriarchy. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's go there. Okay.
Okay.
There are so many, because of patriarchy, because so many ancient texts were written by men in a society where men had power. Mm-hmm. I mean,
Yeah.
if I'm reading this story, I know that this was written by a man. And there's that whole trope of women faking sexual assault, or women blaming men for attacking them for something that they did not do. And women are just liars and that kind of stuff. That was a thing back then. I'm not saying that it's in the Bible because of that, but that is a whole, if you look at any other kind of ancient mythologies and stories and stuff like that, that is a thing that happens a lot of women. If a powerful woman, it's not low class women, powerful women do not get what they want. So they cry rape. And then, it's just a bad look for a woman to be powerful. And so that's my soapbox. I will kick it back under the desk.
I think all that's legit. An additional reason why it's in the Bible is because Joseph is the victim in this story.
Yes.
Mostly because he's dumb. Maybe because he's arrogant, but mostly because he's dumb. So he puts himself in situations, or finds himself in situations where he's kind of taken advantage of, and he gets he's unlucky, unfortunate.
Yeah.
And so again, he has this episode with the brothers and the coat. And now he has this episode with Potiphar's wife in the coat. Mm-hmm. And when we thought things couldn't get worse because he was already exiled from his family into slavery in Egypt, now he's not only a slave in Egypt, but he's also a slave imprisoned in Egypt.
Yes. And it's so he gets to Potiphar's house, and he's Potiphar likes him. That's the thing too, is everywhere Joseph goes, there is favor with him. Right? When he's in Canaan, he's his daddy's favorite. When he gets to Potiphar's house, Potiphar loves him and puts him in charge over all of the servants. Joseph is second in command in Potiphar's house. And the Bible also points out that he's really good looking. Mm-hmm. So he's a hot piece of tail who's in charge with a lot of power.
Yeah.
And then the wife comes along, and she sees this hot piece of tail that's working for her husband. And she's like, I got to get me some of that. And Joseph's response to her is another example of Joseph popping his mouth off when he shouldn't. Because Joseph does not say, I can't sleep with a married woman because that would be wrong. Joseph says, don't you know how important I am? I'm the second most important person in this house. I could never right? Like, he doesn't say, like, it's not a moral quandary. It's almost like I am this important. Like, you can't ask me to do something like that. And he does point out, like, you're my boss's wife.
Right.
So that's, like, even more scandalous. But he leads
he's like, do
with,
you see this coat? Do you like?
Yes.
Yeah.
He, like, leads with, I'm more important than you.
Yeah.
And then he ends up in jail where he's the favorite again.
Right.
And he's in charge over all of the prisoners.
Yeah.
So yeah, that whole episode with Potiphar and Potiphar's wife, like, it just, yeah. Things are looking up, and then he runs his mouth.
And I remember, like, the first time seeing the musical, that scene is portrayed, and I remember thinking, like, this is in the Bible? Like,
Yes.
whoa. Yeah. But so, yeah, there's plenty of stuff. And we generally try to give all the stories as they are to the kids. But this one, we chose to have some discretion.
So in pop-out church, so in children's church, when we've talked about this story, because the kids are like, what did you do to get in jail? I can't, like, not mention it.
Right.
Because Potiphar, like, we say that he was sold as a slave. And so I always just say, Potiphar's wife, if you're just looking for a way to talk about this with your kids, I say Potiphar's wife did not like Joseph. She was jealous because Potiphar really liked Joseph. And so she accused Joseph of attacking her.
Not bad.
I don't get into, like, the sexual assault. It's just like, she accuses Joseph of attacking her, and he really didn't. But Potiphar believed his wife. And then that's the end of the story.
Nicely done.
We go on from there. But when I was a kid, it just was. Like, it was presented to me. Like, we didn't pull any punches.
Well, yeah, and it was an opportunity in the South to degrade women. So
Yeah,
they didn't
to
want to
shame
miss
women.
out. Yeah. Yeah, you got to go for that.
Yeah, it's a powerful woman bringing down a God-chosen man.
Yeah, Jezebel.
I mean, they're all over the Bible. But no, I think it was, like, my parents said that, like, she tried to kiss him. Just not sleep with him.
Yeah.
But she liked him, and she wanted to kiss him. And so then she said that Joseph kissed her.
Good.
Yeah.
I will name that, like, part of the values of the show and our values in, like, children's ministry in general is, like, not lying to kids and not being overly protective of Bible stories that maybe don't get given to kids.
Yeah.
That generally we want to give them the whole story. We just want to do it in developmentally appropriate ways.
Right. Because I don't think it's developmentally appropriate to tell a 6-year-old what rape is.
Right.
Like, that's just not a conversation you want to have.
Yeah. Thank you for
With
putting such a fine point on it.
Yeah.
All right. So he's in jail. He has the favor of the guards.
Yes.
These other two dudes, the cupbearer, which is actually in the Hebrew, it's the master of drinking, which was my nickname in college.
I know.
So, and the baker, and that's just baker. But
Yeah.
But they're in jail too because they pissed off Pharaoh. I don't think we're told why.
No, I think it just says that they offended him.
Right. Or fell out of favor.
Yeah.
And they have dreams. Joseph interprets them. Joseph says, "Remember me," which is also this kind of poignant, like, hyperlink to Jesus. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Except the baker does not remember, and Jesus does.
Well, the baker doesn't remember because his head's on a stick.
Oh, that's right. I get them mixed up. Sorry.
Which that was okay. So the little girl we interviewed,
The Drinkmeister doesn't remember.
yes, the little girl that we interviewed, she was like, I mean, so Joseph has these dreams, and then the guy gets his head cut off and his body stuck on a pole, and, like, so clearly they didn't read the children's version Bible.
Right.
They read the whole Bible.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was, like, something that she was real hung up on. Was like, yeah, they cut his head off and stuck it on a pole.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing that my kids would be like, what did it look like? Like, what did they use? What tool did they use?
Did they use a scythe? Did they
Yeah.
use a?
Yeah.
Did they use an axe?
What all do you have to cut through when you're cutting someone's head off? As if they're planning, you know?
Yeah. You just show them the ending scene of Braveheart.
No, I watched that when I'm alone and sick.
Oh, that's gross.
Oh, it's one of my sick movies. Not just that scene. So Joseph's in jail. The things that happen to the bakers come true. Mm-hmm. The baker and the cup holder. The cup holder makes it out. Then Pharaoh starts having dreams. The cup holder suddenly remembers, I know a guy.
Yeah.
And Joseph gets brought up out of jail. That's the point where Joseph's downward trajectory turns. That's where the curve turns.
Yes.
And there's a couple literary things like he gets new clothes, shaves, and that's like a sign of transition or transformation. And he gets an audience with Pharaoh.
Yeah. Do you think he like side-eyed the cupbearer at one point?
Something tells me you would.
Yeah, I would. I just think like Master Keg Tapper probably was not in the room when he met with Pharaoh. Like I would be avoiding him at all costs.
We are told it's 2 years later.
Exactly.
So yeah, 2 years of remember me not happening.
Yeah, did you lose my number? Or I have like, you know this about me. I'm like notoriously bad at like responding to text messages and emails. I see them, I reply to them in my head, and then I just don't do it. And it's always really awkward when like somebody has sent me a text message and it's been like months. And then I need to reach out to them and I'm like, oh no, because you asked me a question in the last message.
Yeah. Yeah. That's when you reply to the last one and say, sorry, I never got back to you about this, but.
Or just like, oh, I had it typed out and I forgot to hit send.
That's what the cupbearer says to Joseph. I had this referral letter all typed up and it's sitting on my desk at home. And I put it in the wrong bag. I didn't put it in my work bag.
Or he's like, I had the papyrus all inscribed, and then the messenger forgot to deliver it, and then the messenger ends up in jail. Like,
that's right.
So he gets this audience with Pharaoh, and like you said, yeah, the whole thing.
And here's the dream, and natural disaster is coming, and Joseph's like, I got you, and explains all you need to do is save, and then you'll have plenty. So it's Joseph as Dave Ramsey, financial advisor.
Literally rice and beans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what bothers you about the story?
It does bother me about the story. I mean, yeah, the whole like, I think it's like once Joseph gets to jail, that's when his mouth stops, right? And he starts listening to God, and it's like, I guess it doesn't bother me, but it's an observation I made where Joseph stops relying on like his entitlement and begins to like understand that his favor is coming from something other than just being Jacob's special boy. You know what I mean? I think he needed to be humbled over and over and over again. So by the time he gets before Pharaoh, Pharaoh sees that humility in him and trusts him enough to make him second in command.
Yeah.
What about you?
I like that. I mean, like Joseph's autobiography could be like the blessings that you find at rock bottom, you know,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that this story gives to us is in some case like a harsh reality that as long as you're living your life based on your own plans, your own dreams, your own status, all of that crumbles. But rock bottom is a place where you might actually start to listen or look somewhere else. And God lives at rock bottom. And that's good news. I think the thing that bothers me is the natural disaster. And anytime the Bible ascribes God to the weather, I always get okay, so if God did it there, then like first, why can't God just stop the famine? Second, why do the Egyptians get to know about it ahead of time, but all these other cultures don't? So it's just the everyday theodicy question of why does bad stuff still happen? It doesn't seem fair.
God sent the famine, but he also sent the feast.
Sure. Say that to a person who's starving. I think that's the one theologian calls it like the open wound on Christian theology is there are things that we don't have sufficient answers for. And so like it doesn't keep me up at night, but it's another occasion for that kind of question to come up.
Yeah.
I think the story's own answer to it is coming in the third episode where Joseph ends up summarizing the whole experience by saying, what you've intended for evil, God has used for good.
Right.
And so, for whatever reason, our God is not a God that prevents bad things. all bad things from happening. Instead, our God is a God who can transform bad things into good things.
Yeah.
Who doesn't just give life and with no death, but actually is the one who brings life out of death.
Yeah.
Which is good. I mentioned in the Minivangelism episode that the Bible gives us like the truth about the way things are. So it's realistic. It's not rose tinted. But what ends up being the gold is seeing these stories where even at rock bottom, God can turn all of it for good.
Yeah.
And I think that's where our hope comes, and that's where it's a matter of faith.
Yeah.
It's not a guarantee that everything's going to be great. It's actually more of a guarantee that it's not, but that even the not great is something that can still be fertile ground for whatever God is up to.
Yeah. I really like that.
I don't know if it's satisfying, but it's a thing that in a lot of these Genesis stories is part of the conversation, I think.
Okay, so speaking of like other stories in Genesis, I think about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is a very problematic story, and we do not have to get into all of that today because it's another event of like God sending something very weather related to destroy a town. But remember, Abraham kind of has this argument with God about like if there's so many righteous people there, like spare the city, and if you can find 10, 5, whatever. Do you think that if Joseph had not been there in Egypt, because here's the thing, that famine was going to affect Joseph, God's special boy. If Joseph had not been in Egypt, do you think that they would have been warned about the famine? Like those dreams were there, and they were able, like by saving Egypt, Joseph's life is spared because if there's a famine, they're not feeding the prisoners. He may have actually been used for food. Who knows? Like depending on how severe the famine got, right?
This fan fiction is getting dark.
It is. But I'm serious. Like he would not have survived that, right? So I don't know, like, or if Joseph just hadn't been in jail or something like that, like God, because that was a question that June asked, or we talked about, like, God sent this warning to the Egyptians to let them know. And he did that. By doing that, he saved Joseph. So if Joseph hadn't been there, like, would Egypt have gotten this warning? Did he spare Egypt for Joseph's sake?
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm asking you. But yeah, I don't know.
What does it imply about God if we say, like, yes?
That God doesn't care about other people.
Yeah. Or God has favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, as a parent, that's like, and as a teacher, like, that's not something that we like to say. It's like, oh, I don't have favorites.
Yeah.
You have favorites, but
what's fun is the Bible tells us absolutely God has favorites.
Yeah.
The Jews are God's favorite.
Right. So the fact that there was a Hebrew in that land spared them.
Yeah. There's another argument that, like, takes the long view and says, at some level, it's like God got Joseph into Egypt so that God could free the Egyptian slaves from Egypt. So, like, part of it is, like, God is writing this. God's taking the long road. And what God is doing is not just preserving the Israelites, not just preserving the descendants of Abraham. God's not just showing up to protect a few people.
Right.
What God is doing through the story of Scripture is disclosing who God is to the entire world.
Right.
And in order to do that, God chooses a particular people. But what God chooses that people for is for them to be the first who get to see what God can do. And so that, in this kind of thought experiment, that must include them learning that God sides with the poor and enslaved.
Yeah.
And so
and the
prisoner. And so in some sense, Joseph has to experience this so that first Israel and then the world can know what God is like. and the Hebrew slaves must undergo great suffering in order to see and know and then declare that God is the one who sides with the oppressed.
Yeah.
So part of the story of Scripture is God giving to Israel God's autobiography.
Yeah.
And they become characters in God's story.
Yeah.
Which means they do undergo great suffering, but they also receive great blessing, and they never perish from the earth. Like, part of the remarkable thing that I think, like, even modern history includes is there are still Jews. Mm-hmm. And they have never been a people mighty enough to justify their remaining on the earth. And really the only explanation is that they really are God's favorite. And God refuses to let God's own people perish from the earth. They've always been a minority. They've always been oppressed. There's always been people that want their land, their money, the power over them, want to exterminate them. And yet they're still here.
Yeah. They're
still showing up to Shabbat service. And that is in some ways a testament to the resilience of the Jews. But in terms of biblical theology, it's a testament to the promise of God. Yeah. And the faithfulness of God. So I think it's fair to wonder what would have happened to the Egyptians if Joseph hadn't been there. And I'm not sure that's a question that the story is trying to answer. Mm-hmm. It's not the story of how the Egyptians survived a famine. It's a story of what God can do.
Right.
And that's part of why I like the degree to which Joseph always mentions God, always refers to God. Joseph is the one who keeps God as a character in the story.
Yeah. Eventually.
Yeah.
Eventually. Because that first dream, like when he was talking to his brothers about his dreams, he did not say God sent me these dreams.
That's right.
He was like, I had these dreams and I'm better than you.
Yeah. You made me want to reread it and notice, do we you're observing a turning point in Joseph's God talk. And I think it's there. But I wonder, I don't know that I've noticed any particular line in the passage where, and when things got bad enough, Joseph thought about God. I'm not sure we get that, but I think you're right to observe that that's when it happens, is when he's at rock bottom.
I think the reason I I noticed that turn, or I observed that turn, is because I've been there. Where I believe that I get places by my own merit. And when I rely on my own merit to get me somewhere, I end up in a place where I don't want to be. I end up in an Egypt of my own. And it's only when I finally was like, oh, I need to start trusting God on this.
Yeah.
And doing what God's calling me to do and letting him take the lead on it. That's when, and acknowledging that he's the one that got me through those places, despite my own stubbornness getting me there in the first place. For him to be there to pull me out and get me into Pharaoh's house, right? Like, I can't ignore God's hand anymore. I can't ignore that. I can't take any of the credit for that because I know my own shortcomings. And so I think maybe I'm just like projecting too much of myself on Joseph. It's funny because the last time I really like studied this, we were living in Texas, and I was at a school that was not, the staff was amazing. Like my coworkers were amazing and the kids were amazing too. It just wasn't a good fit or a good situation. It was the politics of public education were making my job very hard. It was, like I said, it wasn't the staff, it wasn't the students. It was just the state of the world in 2017, 2018. And I had a co-teacher or a fellow teacher that he and I were both like really struggling with being at this school and knowing that there was something more. And I happened to be studying Joseph at the time. And I just kept saying, like, we just got to get out of Egypt. We just got to get out of Egypt. Like that became our go-to, like God's going to get us out of Egypt eventually. And like now I'm here and I'm in a state that I love and I have like people that I love and I'm in a job that I love. And he's like living his dream. He's a head high school band director. Like he's killing it. You know what I mean? And it's like, I recently connected with him and I was like, we got out of Egypt. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
But yeah. So it's projecting, but whatever. That's what the Bible is for.
I think so too. But there's something else in what you said that I think is worth pondering. And that is this whole thing about thinking that we get places on our merit or by our own power. The only way that kind of changes is when we don't. So, like that's why like the necessity of rock bottom for addicts is at some point you're going to acknowledge that your life has become unmanageable.
Yeah.
But that suggests some interesting things. So, one of the things I wonder a lot of times is why anybody still goes to church, especially people that I like are cool, like or like my friends. Like I'm kind of surprised because it's relatively uncommon.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that we hear, one of the reasons we hear people bring their children to church is because they want them to have like good moral formation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's good. The churchy word for that is like to grow in holiness. And I do think there have been times in my life where I felt like, okay, if I want to be more holy. But part of what you suggest and what this story suggests is like, what if the only way to become more holy is suffering? Mm. Like, what if suffering is in some way God's most fertile ground for making you into somebody who actually has the heart of God? Yeah. It's an uncomfortable thing, but then when I take another lap around our own congregation and ponder, why are these people coming to church? Generally, they're people who have known suffering.
Yeah.
And are either looking for God in the midst of suffering or worshiping God because of God's faithfulness to them in suffering. Yeah. I way too often have those questions of like, what are we doing? This is ridiculous. We're staking our lives on ancient texts about a sky god. Like, but noticing what happens in the midst of suffering, I think is one of the things that that changes my mind about that. Yeah. And I also there have been times when because of, famine, disasters, terrible things, my own faith has been challenged and I kind of want out. But I will say in my life, the faith of Black women has prevented me from leaving this whole thing.
Go on.
The faith of Black women, because patriarchy, because racism, because of the legacy of slavery, if they can still believe, I can still believe.
Yeah.
And it's similar with other groups too. I mean, like we've had big debates about LGBTQ stuff in the church. And when I was doing youth ministry, a lot of that was really hot. And a couple of my friends were changing denominations because the United Methodist Church has been really slow and it's been ugly, trying to navigate all of that. But I had like a couple transgender youth in my youth group, and part of me wanted to leave. Also because the Episcopal Church is fancy and they have beer. So that was attractive. But part of the reason
the pews that have the doors so you don't have to talk to somebody on Sunday morning. That's my own issues.
But like what dawned on me is like, as long as these transgender youth are still going to be coming to United Methodist Church, I can stay.
Yeah.
And I guess that's just something that has developed in my own faith, is the degree to which there are people who have known great suffering, like Joseph, who have told us about a God who was with them.
Yeah.
And it's their testimony that has continued to keep me in the fight.
Something you just said, you were like sky god. Mm-hmm. And he's not a sky god.
Right.
He's a present God.
Right.
And
a rock bottom God.
Yeah. He doesn't cause the suffering. Suffering happens. Suffering is going to happen because we're human beings. the cool thing about God is that he goes into the suffering with you. He's present in the suffering with you. And he's sitting there and he's waiting. You made a comment in an old episode where you were just like, God's got time. Mm-hmm. Like he's got time, and he'll sit in the suffering and wait alongside of you, for you to be like, okay, I think I'm ready. Mm-hmm. I think I don't want to dwell in here anymore. And he remembers you. And June pointed that out too. June was like, God is with Joseph everywhere he goes, and in Joseph everywhere he goes.
Yeah. And I agree that I want to stop short of saying that God causes the suffering. And when I think about like parenting, when my kids are like struggling to tie their shoes, I want to leave them in the struggle, so that they can get it.
We just have all Velcro shoes.
Or if there are kids that, or when the kids insist on doing something themselves, that I know they really can't do, I will have the patience to let them struggle, and then be able to say the words, "Would you like me to help you with that?" Mm-hmm. And I think God be like that too. Yeah. There is a patience of God that will let us try to do things based on our own merit. Will let us try to chase our dreams or wear our fancy coat and think we've got it all. And God will just be patient and wait until we realize that we're, in some sense, we are all alone, and that's where we discover that we are not alone.
Yeah.
That there's something about that is also what love is like.
Yeah.
Is allowing the time for it to dawn on another that you actually do love them. And so on the subject of suffering, I think that's part of the constellation of what we can say. Mm-hmm. Is we want to stop short of saying that God is just out there handing out misery.
That's what he's not causing it.
And there is room for an understanding of love that can only be known as the love that lifts us out of misery.
Yeah.
And so there's some allowance for misery, so that this bottom dwelling, dead raising God can be made known.
Yeah. And I think too, we kind of talked about this in the Minivangelism episode. I think it's Pharaoh is a really good example in this too, because he is the most powerful person in the world, and even he's like, I'm gonna need some help with this.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I am elevated enough. I am so far out of that pit. I know I need some help.
Well, and it's funny the degree to which
let me go hang out with my sister wife.
Yeah. And pagan rulers and like pharaohs throughout the Bible, the thing about pagans is they're happy to let the God of the Israelites do stuff for them.
Yes.
Like, they're like, yeah, there's tons of God. If this one can be my good luck charm for today, great.
Yeah.
But for the Israelites, they can't play that way.
No.
They have this one God, and they are at some level at the mercy and in the mercy of that one God.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We might cut this. I just want to point out, because it's something that is really nerdy. Can I be nerdy for like a hot second?
I'm here for it.
Okay. In the chapter prior to all of this, we take a break from the Joseph story. So like Joseph gets thrown in the pit, and then there's a chapter of some nonsense, and then we join Joseph in Egypt. In the nonsense chapter, there's a story about his brother Judah, who is Jesus's ancestor. Judah and his daughter-in-law. And long story short, daughter-in-law can't have children. Like Judah's sons keep dying. Mm-hmm. And the law states that like she has to keep marrying his sons. And so there's like one son that's too young to get married. And so they send her away to wait. And that son grows up, and they're like, no, this woman's a bad luck charm, so we're not going to do that. This woman, her name's Tamar, she tricks Judah into sleeping with her by posing as a prostitute. And Judah can't pay. And so he gives her his staff and his ring. And when it when he hears that Tamar is with child, he's like, oh no, she needs to be stoned for adultery. And she's like, oh, well, I know who the baby daddy is. And she gives him his staff and his ring back. Later, and so this signet ring, I don't know, it's just like it's really powerful and it's really important. And it's a symbol of power. Jump ahead 2 chapters. Joseph is now made second in command of all of Egypt, and he is given the ring by Pharaoh to like show power and all that stuff. I don't know. I just think it's really freaking cool.
Yeah.
The connection and like, how do you connect those two? Because we've had that conversation before of like, what the hell is this chapter doing in here? Like, why did we like interrupt the saga of Joseph to talk about his weird brother? Like, why?
I did not prepare for this, but
I know, that's why I said we might cut it, but still.
I think generally something you can gather from those kinds of gifts is good news or bad news. You are mine. Mm-hmm. So Tamar is saying, bad news. We're stuck in this. Yeah. We're a family. There's no getting out of this now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and it's twins.
Yes.
That child support's been a big double.
And that's part of what's radical about Pharaoh doing it for Joseph is it's also if we're seeing how close they are right here, Pharaoh and Joseph. Mm-hmm. And then later we will learn that how far they fall again under a new Pharaoh. Yeah. But generally, I think it's a sign of, for better or worse, here's this ring. Mm-hmm. So there's analogies to marriage, to being a part of the family. And then, of course, the hyperlink that comes to me is that a ring is put on the finger of the prodigal son.
Yeah. A signet ring.
Yes.
Yeah. The same. And it's the cloak and the ring and all of that stuff.
Right. And so with Tamar and Judah, it's sorry, we're stuck. You're stuck in this dysfunctional family. Uh-huh. And with Pharaoh and Joseph, it's this great honor that's given. In the story of the prodigal son, it's despite your dysfunction, here is this great honor.
Yeah.
And so if we follow the ring, what Jesus does with the story is give it to somebody. When Tamar gives it to Judah, she's giving him responsibility. Yeah. Same is happening with Pharaoh and Joseph, but it's good news responsibility. Mm-hmm. In the story of the prodigal son, it's the father claiming responsibility. Yeah. For the son who's regarded him as dead. So I think it's cool to look at those 3, and there are probably others, of the signet ring signifying communion, a deep joining, which is in some ways unavoidable, again, for better, for worse. Yeah. But in Jesus' voice particular, it's a joining despite undeserving. Mm-hmm.
And I think it works out for Tamar. Like in the present, it does not work out, but in like the history of the world, it does work out because if you look at the lineage of Jesus, Tamar is only one of 3 women that's mentioned.
Right. She's named in the genealogy. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's really cool. But yeah. Sorry, that was just a side thought I had.
That's great.
When we talked about him getting the ring, I'm like, who else got a ring? Oh yeah, Tamar got a ring.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. How do you want to talk about this with kids?
I think what I try to focus on with my kids is the fact that even if things seem really bad, they're going to get better. Mm-hmm. That God's with you. And maybe pay attention to your dreams. Yeah. Because God speaks to us through dreams. And I think it's one of those, like, if you have, the thing with Pharaoh is like, he had one dream, he woke up, and then he went back to sleep, and he had a similar dream, and he woke up, and he couldn't shake the dream. Mm-hmm. Like, have you ever had a dream that it just sticks with you for a long time? Like, I have memories. Like, I feel like they're actual memories, but I know for a fact that they were just a dream. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, maybe we should be paying closer attention to that. Maybe. If it sticks with you.
Yeah. We had somebody come to our church last week who, when I got to know her, she said, basically, I had a dream and my dead grandfather told me to go to church.
See, that's awesome.
Yeah. Now, like, I don't know the theological significance of a giant milkshake and a donut, so I'm not ready to say all dreams are sacred, but yeah, for sure.
I've told you this story about how my mom and I had a dream on the same night that my husband was deployed, and I had a dream that he was coming home, and I was trying to get the house ready, and my mom was there, and she was like, you don't need to get the house ready. I've got this. You go get yourself ready because your husband's coming home and y'all are going to go out on a date. I've got the baby, like all this stuff. And I was just like, no, I got to clean. I got to do laundry. I got to do all this stuff. My mom had the exact same dream on the exact same night, but from her perspective.
Oh, crazy.
So like I got up that morning and my mom was like, I had the weirdest dream. I dreamed that like David was coming home early and like you were trying to clean up the house and I just wanted y'all to get ready to go on a date. And it was weird like that we had these similar dreams. And literally a couple hours later, my husband called me and he's like, I just got my orders and I'm coming home 3 weeks
that's
earlier.
Awesome.
It was the weird. And like my mom was like in Texas for some reason. Like we had that same dream. So I don't know. Like some people might think it's hokum, but I believe that was something that happened.
That's great.
How are you going to talk to your kids about it?
I think I'm tempted to, when one of my kids is a little bit too big for their britches, say, okay, Joseph, I don't know if that's good parenting or not, but I'm tempted. I think the other is like it's an invitation to patience.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about patience in our house. And when we've got one kid that can have big feelings and have a lot of anxiety and kind of get stuck there. Mm-hmm. And part of the parenting that I've learned through her is part of what she needs is just like somebody to be with her and every 60 seconds or so say like, keep going. We're going to get through this. Mm-hmm. And then it passes and it's okay. And I think that there's some of that practice of patience and like trusting that we'll get through whatever this is part of our faith that comes to bear on parenting. Mm-hmm. And like you do this thing with one of your kids where I know it's like a psych thing for anxiety. Mm-hmm. But I can't remember what it's called. Like, it's like, you're like, what's our list or something like that.
Yeah. So we go, it's like 5 things you can see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you smell, 2 things you feel, and 1 thing you can taste. And so we do our senses. Another one I do with the kids is I do like math problems with them. So like fun parenting fact. Because I have a kid who she's not fully diagnosed, but she struggles with OCD a little bit. And she like, if things get too far off when she was a kid, she developed a tic because things were really bad. And so that's where I got all these tips from. But kids don't have like, our emotions and our logic are in 2 parts of our brain, and kids don't have that bridge built yet that help you go from one side to the other. So you have to trick them. And so when I have kids, my kids are having big feelings, I do math problems with them. Like, what's 1 + 1? What's 2 + 2? What's 3 + 3? And I've started now with the older one because she knows math more than I do. I want you to start naming every kid in your class. And like that just causes her brain to start thinking logically again. Yeah. And so she like moves into that side of her brain and it calms her down.
That's great.
Except the oldest, because we've been doing this with her since she was so little, sometimes I'll be like, all right, so let's name the kids in our class. And she's like, no.
Shut up.
I want to live here.
Yeah.
I don't want to be calm.
I get that too.
The little one's still like so happy about it, but the oldest is just like,
oh,
no.
a game.
Yeah. Let me cry.
That's legit too.
I had a conversation with one of your children about it, where we were somewhere and she had like a big feeling. Mm-hmm. I think we were looking at like Christmas lights and she started to have a big feeling and she was getting emotional. And I was like, you're not allowed to cry at Christmas lights. Like, you're just not, like, as a joke. And I was just like, you're not allowed to cry when there's Christmas lights. She's like, well, I'm crying and there are lights. So what are we going to do about that?
My kid.
And I was like, okay. Well, it kind of does a kaleidoscope effect. Isn't that cool?
What you were just saying about the brain, though, like, it gave me an image of like what we're trying to do with faith formation, like what faith formation is doing the same thing with wherever faith lives in the brain or the heart, is building a bridge from the life you're actually living to what God has said about God's self.
Yeah.
So that you can access that and so that it starts to, there's a bridge between God and both your emotions and your logic.
Yes.
And I love that. I think that's a great summation of what we're trying to do with this podcast in the first place. Is start through these stories to build that bridge, so that at rock bottom or in the middle of a big feeling, we can still access the things of God.
Yes. Agreed.
Because it's what we say God can do and is doing. God is still there, even in the big feelings or the big problems.
You know what I think a good calm down exercise would be?
What?
To tie into this story. I need you to name all 12 sons of Jacob.
Or all the colors in Joseph's coat.
All the colors in Joseph's coat.
Yeah. I don't think ochre is going to get me out of anxiety, but we'll see.
Do you like that picture? The fried ochre picture I sent you last week, it's from that barbecue restaurant down the street.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Good. Great. Well, now I want a milkshake, a donut, and some fried ochre. Thank you for joining us on Minivangelism in the Driver's Seat. Hope you had a good time. We always do. And,
too much.
We want to encourage you to reach out. Let us know what resonates, what doesn't, what blesses you, or tell us a joke or whatever. So reach out to us, email, Instagram, all those things. I'm not going to rattle them off. You can find them. We love you all. I hope you have a great day. Notes. They're in the show notes. I'm doing the part that Annie usually does, and I'm doing a bad job.
It's because you have a meeting in 5 minutes.
It's true. I got to go. All right. God bless you. Talk to you next time.
Okay. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Minivangelism and the Driver's Seat are hosted by Anna Burrell and Drew Colby. Theme song written by David Burrell and produced by Evan Setzer. The theme song was performed by David Burrell, Drew Colby, and Evan Setzer. Podcast, sound design, and editing done by David Burrell. Minivangelism and the Driver's Seat are a ministry of Grace United Methodist Church in Manassas, Virginia. For more information, check out umcgrace.org.